So then we are back with more understandings of the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Mashiyach the prophet. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiyach laid waste for many centuries, where then we find ourselves then studying and wishing for the first holy city of the time of the restoration period on the land of Cush, as per the instructions of Mashiyach the prophet, chapter 1:8, where he described very precisely the site where the first holy city of this period should be at. Not only this, but then the 7 cities of Asia Minor must be then obviously recuperated or then reinstated, so then autumn feast can be then served later. So then during this time we are finding the world then going through a transitional time, yet from the time of the seat of 1,000 years, from 1009 to 2009, or then 5009, then to 6009, if you do not count then starting at 0, or from 6009 to 7009 if you count as starting at 1,000. This, however, is showing us a very critical point, where then we are becoming more acquainted with the holy instructions and how to read then Galah or Revelation, because it is imperative. If a person is saved in the Mashiyach, must explain Galah. If you can't explain Revelation, then you are not a revealed person. Then you are not saved. So then, let's understand what goes on with Revelation. Firstly, our recordings, they are coming from the Greco translation of a Hebrew document. Starts already with a bad starting, because we must receive the understanding firstly from the prophets. That's where we find then the main bulk of the revelation regarding then the autumn feast. So then, prior of reaching the autumn feast, let's try to understand what goes on then with the 11th chapter of Daniel. Daniel was then a statesperson. He was then obviously acquainted with tabernacling, but he was a person related with the Gentile level mostly, because he worked under many kings. And then the 11th chapter explains during the time of then the Mede. We can read and understand precisely then what Daniel was going through. He said then, in the first year of Darius the Mede, so he was then a king related with the section of the Medes, and then a standing very strongly regarding the fourth, or then simply walking on a path pre-established. First the son Ishmael, second the son Yitzhak, and then maintaining the loyalty of these holy anointing, or then mostly regarding with the covenant with the second son. But the first son also had half of the anointing, and because he was a tradesperson, he was relating how was then during the time of Ishmael. As he maintained then this line, obviously he had many obstacles he had to face, and one of them is for our time is related with then the projection of the time of the restoration period. So then when we read the 11th chapter of Daniel, we are not in fact reading the kingdom of the Greco country. It's not the Greco country, but is the kingdom of the East, for our time known as China. How do we come to this conclusion? It's very simple. Prior of 1009, or then 6009, the world went through as if they were ending a period of the 1,000 years of the Mashiyach. It was a period then when Gog and Magog, or then back then the Greco and the Romans, they gather up what they stored as far as knowledge and what they were wishing for, and then they became the Gog and Magog of the time. thus then the ending of the 1,000 years of the Mashiyach. Then came 1,000 years of deceit. Then we are explaining at the moment the time of the restoration period, where then once again we are going to revive those years prior of the ending of the holy cities, of the kingship of the Mashiyach. However, we must change those countries with the proper knowledge of the existing situation of our time. This is what makes then the instructions absolutely intact. The only changes are then the understanding of the step-by-step events, or then the flow of events of our time from a pre-established, experienced time known as prior of 1009 or 6009, related with the Gog and Magog, the Greco and the Romans. So then during our time, when we read the 11th chapter of Daniel, we must replace those countries with the proper understanding. Why do we know this? It's because chapter 10 is the fasting of Daniel, related with the leader of the trade of the restoration period. You find then the 12th chapter then simply organizing the situation for the end or the autumn feast. You'll find the 11th chapter is the relationship with the first, second, and third kingdoms, north, south, and then east. And then after the 12th chapter, you find the last section of it, Baal and the dragon. Then you find the spiritual understanding of these when you read then Galah. So then at the moment when you read then the third verse of the 11th chapter, it's not the Greco country, it is East, kingdom of the East, because we are positioning ourselves during the restoration period and no longer on the 8th chapter of Daniel, where Alexander the Great was then leader of the Greco country, obviously. Then as we read on, you find then a section of it related with the fourth kingdom's riches. Interesting, the fourth kingdom was Rome, with the legs of iron. So then you find Gog and Magog of the previous section of the holy cities prior of 1009. You find Gog and Magog as the Greco and the Romans. In our time is United States and Israel, and there is a reason for it. Later on I'm going to study more, but at the moment this is where we are at. So then, after evaluating then the 11th chapter, we find ourselves waiting for the deal of Mr. Shi and Mr. Kabila, so then we can move on with the holy instructions, because the whole 11th chapter depends firstly of a deal with Mr. Kabila and Mr. Chi, so then Congo can be organized because of the rare materials. They do have a lot of it, and because the kingdom of the south must be developed, and it's time for Africa, obviously, because China is already the leader. As you then read these 10th chapter, you find Daniel himself was then concerned, because he was doing the usual. He was going to the king's court, he was then giving his reports, he was working on behalf of the king Darius the Mede, as he did with the previous kings. He was then very faithful and loyal. However, as he was going to the river for a nap, as what he used to do, he was then taking naps, and no dreams regarding then the time of the end was then coming. He began to be very suspicious and concerned, because he knew there was a section yet of the statute of the 2nd chapter where iron does not mix with the clay, and he had no directives on how those pieces of iron would relate with each other. So he set his time then, and he began to fast, because he felt in the spirit there was then extra information coming in the future. So he did, and sure enough, the answer came. And then the angel said, besides what you have learned thus far, up to the legs of iron, there will be yet first, second, and third kingdoms. And they have the characteristics of the fourth. So then we can understand from then on the spiritual section of it, of this time, so then we can project them on Galah. Then we can reveal ourselves further. At the moment we are simply waiting for the deal of Mr. Chi and Mr. Kabila, so then we can understand later then the reconstitution then of the Soviet Union. As we understand, the Soviet Union was reinstated this year in May. But then the vast political section of the socialism of the Northern Kingdom, as precisely as the same type of government of the King of China, must be then implemented in the Kingdom of the North, but it's tailor-made for their own purposes. So then you find then a section of it later where then there is some sort of a Gentile Netzer, and this truly relates with the time of the Soviet Union in the 60s. Because when you read then chapter 11, verse 1-4, explains then the kingdom of the north shall be greater than the former. What does it mean? What the Soviet Union used to be in the past as a force of a military nature, they will become once again, but starting with trade, a socialism related with trade first. Then later on they will become then a nation where they will be then stronger than the former as military, then coming with much equipment. That makes sense. So then from then on, then we can explore this area, because Cuba is also involved with it, and there is a direct relation with Soviet Union and Congo. As Che Guevara was involved from Cuba, he went to Congo, bringing then the revolution, or then trying to make their nations as one under the leadership of then the Soviet Union as a means of an end. This truly is coming back, but then as the main point as trade, because China, as you read in the first section, it speaks of division, but it's not a division, it is a separation of extension. China's system is then extended. In our language, when we read then the instructions, it's not division meaning destruction. It is taking the example of China and extending to other countries. This is what it means. So let's understand from then on, after this deal with Mr. Kabila and Mr. Xi, we can then understand the rest of the world and how they are going to play out. At the moment, we can simply understand infrastructure, then related with mining, very important to maintain the kingdom of China then going. They will obviously want more materials, raw materials, become then the factory of the world. Not only this, but then farming is very important. And then later on I'm going to explore some of these areas, so then we can become more acquainted with the world's market from the viewpoint of the whole instructions. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.